Hello, today I'm going to talk to you about the benefits of touring a site where you have a project taking place. I've recorded two videos. This is the second of these. The other one was about a factory site. The one I'm going to talk about today is an office building. So a lot of the complications you might have with a factory don't exist. An office building is much more straightforward. But this is a really interesting example of the benefits of actually touring the building directly yourself and actually looking at everything and every room and every phone yourself. Now, you'll decide for yourself whether this is beneficial for your particular project. If you have 600 sites that are in a different country, well, that's not really going to be feasible for you to go and have a look yourself. But if it's a single office building, it's something you can do in a few hours yourself, and it may well be worth doing. In this particular case, it became really significant. I'll get into that. Now, one other thing I will say is that I install telephones as part of my projects, but what I'm talking about today will apply to all sorts of other projects, technology, other sorts of projects. It can be really useful to see things for yourself. So, first of all, we're talking here about a large office building. To give you an idea of scale, about 3,000 people work in this building. My project was to migrate. Let me start again. The previous projects before mine were to migrate individual teams or departments from an old phone system to a new phone system. The two systems were working side by side, or technically we would actually say one is piggybacked off the other. Is piggyback the technical term? Anyway, two systems, one building, and various departments on one system, various departments on the other. The way the systems together were designed, that it was completely transparent, so the users wouldn't really they wouldn't know which system they were on. It didn't matter to them, which is in a sense partly the problem. So we have a building where some people are on the new system and some people are on the old system, and my challenge was to migrate the remaining people onto the new system and then decommission the old system. And I was given a list of the teams and departments that were thought to be in scope for this project. Now, this was a bit of a patchy situation. It wasn't like every floor from floor 15 upwards is on the new system. It was individual teams. And I think what had happened is that as each part of the building was refurbished, as teams moved from one place to another, facilities had organised with IT for the new phone system, the phones from the new phone system to be installed in those new areas. And it was really very patchy which were which. And the key thing is that we had a list of teams and departments that were yet to be migrated. But when I looked at the call logging data, it didn't make sense. I can't remember exactly the details, but either or both of, we were seeing a higher volume of calls through the old system than should be the case, and possibly seeing calls from numbers that were out of the scope that we had been given. Clearly, if calls are passing through the system, through the old system, we need to identify who's making them, how they're getting into the old system, and we need to migrate them across to the new system, because you can't just shut down a system if you've got calls passing through it. So I realized at that point, which was not the beginning of the project, but I realized once we'd seen the call logging figures, that we would have to look around the whole site. I didn't do it all on my own. I did have some help from the cabling contractors, and we walked around the whole site, every part of the site. And that's important for this, because we could have just seen a particular team had the new phones and think, oh no, we don't need to look at this floor. Big mistake, big mistake. And really, this isn't a technical walk around. Didn't need a screwdriver. Notebook, camera in my phone, but also a butt-in set, sometimes just called a butt. It's basically a test telephone. It's a thing you can hold in your hand with a phone plug, and you can plug it into a phone jack. That's relevant to this as well. So by walking around the whole building, we know where all the phones are. We know which parts of the building. Basically, we know where every phone is. Every new phone, every old phone. We were fortunate, as is often the case with this sort of situation, that you can tell at a glance whether a phone is on the new system or the old system. They look totally different. However, one of the complications is that, as we discovered, even in departments or teams that have been migrated to the new system and weren't on the list to be worked on, their fax machines, yes, they still had fax machines, were on analog lines, and those were on the old system. They also had conference phones that were using analog lines, which were also still on the old system. Clearly, the people who had installed the new phones for these departments had just installed the new phones. They hadn't thought of anything else at all. And that was quite tricky because, as I say, you can tell an old phone from a new phone very easily. For a fax machine, you need to plug into the line to find out whether it's the old system or the new system. And because they're being configured so that the experience for the users is exactly the same, it's kind of like when you plug in, you get dial tone. What does that tell you? So we had to have a special code set up on the old system so that if you dialed that code, you'd get unobtainable tone. That's what we call it in the UK. In the US, I think you call it reorder tone. But it meant that if you dialed this 3-digit number, you'd get a response that was different if it was on a line on the new system compared to a line on the old system. And that is how we discovered that the fax machines, conference phones were still on the old system. So, what are the takeaways from this? Well, we discovered that many more phones were needed than were originally in the scope. In the scheme of things, this wasn't a serious matter because of the nature of the building, the nature of business, and the relative scale. For a small standalone project, this could have been a big problem because, and I can't remember the exact numbers, but it wouldn't be far off to say that the number of new phones required was about double what we had expected. Also, we needed to install more analog gateways. This is a technical matter that won't necessarily relate to your projects, but we need to install more equipment that we really hadn't expected to need to install. And the important thing here is, of course, that because our mission was to close down, switch off the old phone system, you really can't just say, oh, we were given a scope of 1,000 phones. We've done 1,000 phones, we're done. You can't switch off the old phone system until you've migrated everyone, whoever they are. You've got to track them all down. So there's expense involved in this. There are cost implications. But the one thing, of course, about walking around the site in person, and with also the trusted team from the cabling contractor who had a long relationship with the customer, you can talk with authority. Nobody's going to say, oh, they don't really need that many extra phones. They say, well, yeah, I've seen them. I've been around the building. I know where they all are. So doing that tour of the whole building enabled me to understand what was really required and enabled us to complete the project, including shutting down the PBX, the old system, without any loss of service. Which otherwise might have happened. We could have got quite stuck. I think in the end we would have had to do a tour of the building anyway. So it's one of the situations where as soon as you realise that's what it needs, you just have to do it. And we worked over the weekend to do it. It's like you realise the data's all wrong. You've got to get a handle on that before you can do anything more. So anyway, I hope you found that useful. As I say, my technology is telephony, but you'll find this useful perhaps for multiple other projects doing totally different things. The idea that you need to see yourself what is actually required and not just take what the customer says as what they think is required. So I hope you found that interesting. Let me know in the comments what you've experienced and what your ideas are following from what I've just said. Thanks for listening, and goodbye.